We've got a steady stream of email always coming in requesting we demonstrate the various HDTV settings that affect picture quality. I think this would be a good time for calibrating your display 101.
Yeah, that would be a good one. We should definitely start with some basics first.
Okay.
And I'd say number one is you probably don't know the current condition of the TV in terms of has somebody else messed with it, have they changed specific settings. So it's always a good idea just to reset that thing. And some TVs provide a handy shortcut to reset everything.
Yes.
For example, newer Sony TVs can be fully reset by holding the up arrow on the remote and pushing the power on button on the TV itself.
Cool.
It just will suddenly display reset, and then it goes back to just like it was when you took it out of the box. Now, other TVs like Samsung have a more hidden way of doing that, but at the same point, just about every TV has a menu setting in the display settings that says reset everything. So that's what we're looking for. And since we are using a Blu-ray disc player as the source device for our video, it's a good idea to make sure that it is also reset to its default settings, and we can always go back and tweak it if needed. So with that in mind.
So start basically with the stock settings.
Yeah, get back to how it was right when you took it out of the box, just to ensure that there isn't something that's been changed that you were just unaware of that would later on just ruin everything you just did and you have to start all over.
Right.
Why not just start at the beginning? That's always a good place to be. And there are lots of quality HD test pattern discs out there that are available for purchase. We've shown the Spears & Munsell benchmark disc as well as Digital Video Essentials HD Basics. Both are available on Blu-ray. You can buy those online for a pretty low price if you want. A good free alternative is the AVSHD 709 calibration disc. That's available for download on the spectracal.com website with more info and links provided on the related AV Science forum posting.
And that's what's running right here.
That's what we actually have running. This is a file you can download. It's available in a couple different formats. We're using one called AVCHD. That's a common HD camcorder format. And you burn that to a regular DVD, and it will play in most players. They actually have a chart on the AV forum where you can look through and see, oh, this is my player, this is the version I should probably use. We're using that Panasonic, was it the 300 Blu-ray player that we showed off last week? I know it supports AVCHD, so we're using that disc with this player, and I think we're pretty good to go. I would then start by looking at the TV's picture settings. Every TV out there offers, or most of the new TVs that you'll find today offer a picture preset that's labeled something like custom or user, basically a picture preset that allows you to play with all of the settings.
It's usually like movies, television, sports.
Those are some of the presets that are there, but we're looking for that one that says either custom or the one that says like user. Those are usually the two most common names I see.
We should point out, as much as we despise strange presets that are designed to emulate theaters in the audio side of things, the presets on most HDTVs actually are a quick and dirty, a fast, reasonably good way to get your picture looking good. If you don't have time to calibrate like hit movie, hit sports, whatever you're doing, at least eyeball it. That could be really
I find when we
way.
reset the TV, that's generally a good setting for a bright room. Something like cinema or movie mode would be good for a darker room setting for a little more detail and picture quality. But that's just a quick and dirty trick right there. Now we're going to dive right into the picture settings on the TV itself, and the first thing you need to look at and locate is something called picture size, and we'll get into something else called color temperature. Picture size is really just how much the picture on the screen is being scaled to fit the screen itself.
Overscan?
Overscan is another word for that, and we just want to make sure it is turned off. We're using a device that puts out a 1080p signal to a 1080p TV. There is no reason for it to be stretching that picture beyond the active portion of the screen. So we just want to make sure that's turned off. It's usually labeled something different on different TVs. Sony has it under a picture size setting. Samsung actually places it under their tool menu, as they actually have a specific picture size function right up here in the corner. I could dig into the main menus, but they have it right here, and it's quick and easy. And this, ta-da, is an example of an over-resolution / resolution, or overscan / resolution patterns and things like that. So
it's crazy because of kind of a hangover from the old SD tube television broadcast days. They used to basically, the televisions would actually put the screen far beyond the edge of the tube or it was cable. And in HDTVs, because there's a one-to-one pixel mapping, you actually can find televisions that are set where just a huge chunk of the information coming from your Blu-ray player or your satellite or your cable TV is wasted because it's shoved off the edges for no reason.
It's also really common in rear projection TVs because the edges might not be perfectly straight, so they'd rather just shine that projector a little bit bigger, hide those edges, and keep that unwanted artifact out of sight. Here on flat panel televisions like LCDs and plasmas, completely unnecessary, so turn that stuff off. If you notice the border, it's showing approximately about a 5% overscan right now, about 2.5% on each side. I'm just going to go in here and switch from the what should be, you think 16 by 9, oh, it should be showing 16 by 9. Samsung labels there something called Just Scan. And when I do that, suddenly, boom, I just regained 5% of the picture. The video picture, so the source device now is mapped 1-to-1 with the TV. And if I get rid of that, in the corner they actually have these single, double, triple pixel patterns that if they look perfect, then you know you've got 1-to-1 mapping. If you're seeing full detail in the finest of the line patterns here, you're going to be good to go. And you know you've got it right. That, and you can see all the borders around the edge.
Cool.
Done. We're getting the full picture, full 1080p onto a 1080p screen mapped 1-to-1, just right.
So once you've got it set, so you're actually just seeing every pixel from your content on your screen, it's time to start playing around with colors, or more accurately, color temperature, which you call the color of gray.
Yeah, it might seem unintuitive, but video as we deliver it from discs is actually compressed in such a way where color is way more compressed, and the high resolution part's actually in black and white. And it's very important that that black and white portion of the signal be delivered. You know, there's a standard for what color of white is to be used for reproducing that picture. Technically, it's called something D65 or 6500 Kelvin. What we're trying to do is get the TV to be as close to that as possible. A couple of tricks, well, the rules of thumb really are you don't want white to be too blue, and you don't want it to be overly reddish either. You want it to be fairly neutral. Now, with a stepped grayscale pattern like we have up here, you can kind of get an overview of what the color of gray kind of is. This to me looks a little bit bluish compared to instead of perhaps a little more red. And just by adjusting the color temperature setting on the TV, which will probably require me to go into the picture menu itself, so I'm just going to dive into the picture menu real quick. In terms of everyone naming something a little bit different, color temperature setting on this particular TV is actually called color tone. It's at warm 2, which is, I think, the warmest it'll go. That means it's a little more reddish. Warm 1.
Whoa.
And if I go any cooler than that, well, you can actually see it if I get rid of it. But turning it all the way up, that looks really blue to me. I definitely want it the other way around, so I'm going to go back and change that back too. It was already at warm 2. That looks like a good place to be, so I'm just going to leave it there. Now, having that warm picture color temperature and the picture size fixed, I'd also go through and make sure things like video noise reduction are disabled as well. With Blu-ray movies, you really don't need to be adding any noise reduction to the picture. It's a clean source. For most sources you're going to be looking at, you really don't need to be adding noise reduction to anything because there is a possibility that you could lose detail. Now, at this point, we kind of have a solid start to everything. We've got our picture mapped properly. We've got the color temperature where we want it. Next week, we'll tackle the two most important and misunderstood picture settings, brightness and contrast.
Last week, we walked you through the basics of getting your HDTV calibrated. Our top 3 tips for unscrewing your HD picture, from zeroing out the factory settings to getting your picture size and color temperature sorted. This week, part 2, we tackle the 2 most important and misunderstood picture settings, brightness and contrast.
Indeed.
Everybody thinks like, I've been doing brightness and contrast since like UHF when I was 7. I mean, it's not that simple.
Not necessarily. It can be confusing, and the picture quality goals that we're looking at we're going to try to achieve by adjusting contrast and brightness on a TV include we're trying to maximize the dynamic range of the picture, aka contrast. We're also going to try to minimize any potential distortions. This would apply for anything from CRTs on up to the latest flat panels. You can actually distort the picture in certain ways, either through color or through geometry if you end up cranking these controls one way or the other too far. Or,
well, you always have me wondering, right? Because you get the contrast, you've got your moderately lit room, you get your contrast set, you set your brightness, you actually see that perhaps a movie is supposed to be darker than you ever realized because you're not watching on the blow my eyes out and get a suntan mode that comes from the factory
totally.
store. Does if you set the flat panel up to adjust itself based on the brightness of the room, does that screw up your carefully calibrated settings?
For LCD panels, typically what's going on is the backlight is just being reduced. It shouldn't change any of the detail that you see in the screen. Shouldn't, a big caveat there, but so just if all it's doing is just changing the backlight levels, you should be fine. On plasma displays, they might be doing other things as well, or actually on any type of display, but in plasmas in particular, you don't have a backlight system just turned down. You're actually turning down the intensity of all the pixels. That could change things, but it shouldn't. Those kind of adjustments, those automatic brightness setting modes or compensation modes usually don't affect picture quality as much as they don't detrimentally affect the picture quality. And I do recommend them for power savings, but that's probably a different topic altogether there. So,
do we start with brightness or contrast?
Yeah, always start with brightness. And in most TVs I've looked at, the implementations I've seen, this is a poorly named setting because, in fact, it doesn't actually affect picture brightness whatsoever, but instead it controls the cutoff point for the picture's darkest details. If it's turned down too low, the subtle details in a picture, the darkest details, will become indistinct. If we crank the brightness up too high, you're going to see that your blacks and dark grays are actually kind of washed out, and it degrades picture contrast. So, and like you were mentioning about room lighting effects and perhaps a sensor on the TV, we're assuming that's turned off, but our ability to perceive dark detail for the human eye is actually, it's directly affected by room lighting. So before we make any adjustments, you want to ensure that the room lighting that the TV is in is typical for your viewing environment. Like, do you normally have all the lights on when you watch TV?
Do you normally have 7,000 watt scoops blaring from the ceiling?
Because it will change, especially the black level setup in terms of where we're going to set that, or in this case, brightness, what we're going to talk about. But make sure the TV is warmed up for about, say, 20 minutes, and do make sure that the lighting is typical, because if it's not, it'll look different, say, if the room's really dark, if you normally look at it when it's bright, or vice versa. Ta-da! Digging right in. Hey, the brightness setup, we're still using that AVSHD 709 disc. This is an HD test pattern disc that we talked about where you can download it. And with brightness, what we're going to do is pull up, arguably, the first test pattern on the basic settings portion of this disc. Let me just pull that up really quick. Now what we got here is black levels on a black background, obviously, but the grayscale steps are going from, say, level 25 all the way down to level 2. Now, where we need to have that cutoff is level 16. You want 16 to disappear, you want 17 to be visible. That's the whole argument. So I'll just exaggerate this by going in and cranking brightness way up. There, when I crank it up, it becomes very easy to see. A couple of things right off the bat. You're seeing all the levels all the way down.
Right.
If the players say we're not set up properly, or there's a setting in the TV, it might be, get off of there, brightness. It might be just clipping 16 down no matter what I do to brightness. So if that's the case, I would look into the settings on the player to make sure you're getting full range output before you make this adjustment.
And you can definitely see, like, the blacks are gray, everything's blown out. It's definitely...
Totally. You should not see anything below reference black. And as the movies are produced, for video we look at, there isn't any detail in there that you should be seeing anyway that is below reference black. So anyway, let me just turn down brightness.
So everything below 16 is going to...
16 and under. Now this is where room lighting becomes key, because if the room is really bright, you might have to take it up a couple notches above where, say, you would normally have it, say, in a dark room. So you just keep making that adjustment. And if it comes down to, you know what, one click, one way or the other, always make it a little bit darker if you don't know which way to go.
I mean, it's amazing. You don't realize, especially because whenever you go to buy an HDTV or regular television, traditionally they have like the vivid mode. It's very blue, the light's pumped up, the brightness is pumped up. So we think we're supposed to have this blazing bright screen in front of us. And the reality is most people don't have, most television sets are set way, way too bright.
Yeah. For a bright room, though, you need all the light you can get out of it. But for critical viewing in a light-controlled environment, it's just the opposite. You don't want too much light, otherwise your iris is going to constrict, and you won't be able to see dark detail as well. So we're going to say that we've got our level 16 is invisible, level 17 is visible. A test pattern like this I find is really easy to use for that, because it's each step, one after the other, is delineated really nicely, and you can see right where it cuts off. Done. So let me get.
It's not Futurama.
No, it's not Futurama, and we're not in the service menu doing this either. So the very next thing we're going to tackle is contrast. Now, on the contrast setting, I'm just going to skip ahead to a white pattern. Now, contrast is kind of interesting. Contrast actually, the picture, TV's contrast control actually does directly affect a picture's overall brightness. And ideally, you want that setting to be configured so that the picture is as bright as possible without sacrificing detail or unwanted distortions. Also, if the picture was just too bright and you had no other way of dimming it, say for a darkroom environment, you could use contrast as well to just tone it down. This setting it too high can be really detrimental, but it's almost never a picture problem to crank it way down if you have to.
Good to know.
So just keep that in mind. Now, this one I'm kind of a pet peeve about. Technically, they call it peak white 235 as far as that digital scale from 0 to 254. So technically, there shouldn't be information above 235, but there might be. And there's no reason not to take advantage of it. I find some videos have been produced that, particularly cloud detail and other bright gray detail,
they'll have actually information
there
higher
is
than
still some extra detail to be eked out by ensuring that you see it all the way up to, say, 254 or whatever. So in this case, similar to what we were doing before, we're going to go into the contrast mode. And actually, this will be interesting because you'll see what happens when you crank it too high as well. Actually, I hope so. On this TV, it might be already pretty well done, but
We're also in a pretty bright room.
I took this all the way up, and I'm trying to see if, even taking it all the way up, I can still see some of the finest detail. So this is already kind of an exceptional TV, and it's pretty well dialed in. But if taking it down, you'll see it also reduce the gray level, how bright white is in sense, while at the same time, it doesn't sacrifice anything. So like I was saying before, if you had no other control for adjusting a TV's overall brightness, mess with the contrast. Turn it down to make it more comfortable. Don't touch the brightness setting. Instead, mess with contrast.
So are we definitely looking to make sure we have like 17 through 25 visible, 2 through 16 invisible, and the same thing for the white patterns?
That's it exactly.
Okay.
Well, for the white pattern, you just want to
and higher.
you just want to make sure you can see all the levels above it. Again, that might be related to the source device setting. Make sure that it's set for a full range output, and you want to be able to see all of these steps, if possible, without any kind of distortions. Then, usually, if you crank it up too high, the very top gray bars, the most bright light gray bars, tend to take on a pink hue. And if you're starting to see any color changes or things like that, turn it down. And at the same point, like you were just saying, these are interactive controls for brightness and contrast. So when you're done getting your contrast set the way you want, go back and check the black level setup again for brightness and make sure that you can still see level 17 but nothing below it.
Do we want 235 and below to appear or disappear?
Always. You want all the white detail to appear.
all the white
You definitely want to be seeing from 230 up to 235.
Got it.
A lot of Blu-ray players you'll find are set up by default to just clip everything above 235. And I prefer it not.
Okay, but 235 to 253 is a bonus on most monitors.
Totally.
Good to know.
You should be able to see that. Now, on a computer display, you would see the full range from 0 to 254 in a computer environment. Now, if you're doing this on your computer, oh, there we go, even a bigger, even a larger size screen. Now, in a computer environment for computer graphics, you're seeing the full range all the time. But if you go into your video driver settings, typically they've got separate controls for just video sources. And that's where you can then select, okay, when I'm watching video, make sure that 16 and below is invisible, and preferably 235 and above is visible. So when you're done setting up contrast, one thing to look at is to see if any colors happen to be clipping. You might have it with a black and white test pattern. It might look fine, but it's always a good idea to take a look at
the color detail,
a color scale, to make sure that you're not clipping particular colors either. Because if you are, you want to continue turning contrast down until all the detail is resolved. So they happen to have a great pattern under miscellaneous patterns on this AVSHD test disc. And let me go, I think it's 2 ahead. Uno, dos. There we go. We're just making sure that, take a look at the primary colors and secondary to make sure you can see every step on this chart from the darkest to the lightest and vice versa.
It's like red's always kind of blown out. Everything else is there, but red's
If it looks blown out, then the thing to do would be to just quickly run into the contrast again, turn it down a couple notches, and see if that corrects it. It should.
Bingo.
Yeah. And that's what we needed to do. Then I would say you've just changed contrast. Go back and check your black level again. Make sure that's okay. But you know pretty much not to go say above whatever to make sure you're getting full color resolution.
It's a vicious circle.
It truly is.
Make it stop.
It's an iterative process, and we will get it done.
I mean, at what point do you quit? When do you know you're ahead far enough or behind far enough to quit?
That was it.
Okay.
It's not too difficult. It's just a matter of knowing which test patterns to use to give you the proper results you're looking for, and to get it right depending on the room lighting environment, especially for the black level.
Anything else we want to play around with in terms of, because basically the brightness and contrast is adjusted, we've killed the overscan, we've made sure our formatting is correct.
Ooh, we have color and tint coming up. That'll be the next 2 things we'll tackle, and some of the other miscellaneous settings that might be worth exploring.
Color and tint's dangerous.
Color and tint's actually not too easy. Oh, this is a good time to say that if you want to do this for next week, get yourself a blue filter, or find out if you have a newer TV, there might actually be a blue mode. Go grab your manual and look through it to see if that's available, because you're going to need that to adjust color and tint properly.
Homework, people.
Yes.
Part 3 of our series on DIY HDTV calibration. This week's topic, color and tint. So how do we avoid green-skinned bipeds outside of not watching Star Trek movies, Rob?
Take this thing away from me. Sorry. I'll sit here and play video games.
Angry Birds. It's infectious.
The color and tint control. So far this week we went through the basic setups, including getting those picture sized right, making sure we turned off overscan, things like that.
Right.
We got the brightness and the contrast set right.
Those are the big 2.
Those are the big 2. Now we're finally getting to color and tint. Now when we talk about color, we're talking about color saturation. If you adjust the control on any TV and turn the color setting all the way down, the picture will effectively become black and white at that point.
Right.
So, and if we crank it way up, colors become oversaturated. And what
get
we're looking
green
for
people.
is where's the correct thing. With tint, it's actually hue control. That really determines the type of color that when you make that adjustment, that's where you really are changing color on the screen. The overriding goal we're looking for here is realistic skin tones, period. Realistic color overall. We're looking to make it look the way it should be. And the best way to do that is to use a reference test pattern. You may be familiar with the color bars, SMPTE color bars that you've seen probably after hours, late night TV. Well, I don't know.
The HDNation logo.
The HDNation logo, SMPTE color bars. This is similar to that. This is a modified pattern, modified test pattern that uses animated color bars. And I find these animated patterns are easier to use because they're blinking. They're constantly changing, so you can quickly see when things are kind of lining up the way we want them to. Now, to use a pattern like this, you need a blue filter. THX on their website sells them for $2. Better still, though, is to use a blue mode. Yeah, something like that, or the wonderful, wonderful blue filter. That's a multi-tint filter. It's the red, blue, green filter that came with the, I want to say, the HD Basics disc. That includes a really good filter, too, but here's an example of just plain blue filters you can get on the THX website. You basically wear these while you're looking at that pattern, while you're making the adjustments. But like I was saying, better still is a blue mode built into the TV itself. A lot of the new 2010 TVs I've looked at incorporate some kind of a blue mode in the advanced settings. This is great. This beats using a blue filter any day of the week because you're actually using the TV's own technology to make what you need to see to make the adjustments you want. So let me just dig in real quick. This is the test pattern on that same AVS disc we were talking about.
What's our goal with this test pattern?
This is to get the settings correct. Okay. And the reason we're using a blue filter to look at this pattern is because color is highly compressed in the video signal compared to the black and white portion of it. And any changes that we make to the controls for color and tint, you're going to notice it first in the blue channel. So using a blue filter, you'll notice it just making the minor adjustments. You'll go, okay, you'll notice the changes a lot more quick using blue compared to any other colors. So that's why we use blue. No pick. And this TV happens to have that wonderful blue mode I was talking about. So under picture options on this particular set, it'd be different for, your set, of course, but blue on,
whoa,
ta-da, exit. Now, this isn't too far off. We're going to start with color first, and the way to do that is then to go back into the menu, and I'm going to go over here to the color setting, color. Now, just to give an example, I'm going to crank it way up and down so you can see the changes. Particularly, just pay attention to color on the two outer bars, what would be blue and gray. And you can see where it's changing. You can see clearly there's a difference there. I'm going to go back the other way, and it'll basically invert. And the goal here is to make it so it effectively vanishes into the background. The animated portion should be no different from the bar that it's sitting in. So, and hopefully this is pretty close to the midpoint on this TV. So as we get closer to, say, I'm just eyeballing this now, I'd say that's pretty, I want to say 53 on this particular TV. It also helps too when you look at this pattern to squint a little bit, and it helps blend in the pattern so it makes it easier to see when it matches up. So now that we've got color set, we're going to go right to tint and do the same darn thing, but instead we're using the two inner bars, which happens to be the yellow and magenta bars, or magenta and cyan, excuse me. I find on most TVs nowadays, you shouldn't have to move the tint setting much at all. I find that usually it's at 50%, and they usually get that right from the factory. So it's odd that you would have to tweak it at all, say more than one or two spots. Let me get it closer until, I'm going to do a little squint while I'm staring at that until literally it all just sort of disappears. Look at that. On this TV, it happens to be right at 50%. The controls are also interactive between contrast and tint like it was for brightness and contrast.
So tweaking one, you might have to go back and tweak the other.
Totally. And having this kind of a pattern up where everything's on the screen at once kind of makes that easy to see if that happens or not. When that's done, boom. Basically, we're going to go back to the menu, get out of blue mode. Don't need it anymore. Now, this wouldn't be the best unless you're really familiar with how those colors should look on a SMPTE color bar pattern. Fire up again some content you're familiar with that has skin tones in it, and really take a look at how everything looks. Does grass look correct? Do people look right? Do colors that you expect on content you're familiar with, does it look the way you think it should? And it's really no more difficult than that. The tricky part is just having the blue filter, or better yet, that TV that has the blue mode built in.
You do have to be careful though, because if you've been watching a poorly adjusted television for years, you may have an entirely different expectation for what your favorite television or video programming,
It's
AC
nice though.
programming
Once
is
you get
supposed to look
color
like.
dialed in right, tint's usually always the midpoint, but when you get color dialed in right, it really can make a difference in even a modest TV. In terms of just producing a picture. It looks more natural, looks more like it should have, or as the director saw it when he was editing that sucker together in the studios. So
we hope.
Simple. I think for next week we're going to hit sharpness and maybe one other setting. Sharpness is a setting I think a lot of people overlook.
What about motion blur? My
I think
nemesis
people view it.
is.
We are doing. I think we should do a whole separate segment just on the new TVs that feature smoothing effects for film content.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, part 4, possibly the concluding segment in Robert Heron's ultimate DIY self-home calibration HDTV Make It Better extravaganza. Dude, sharpness.
All about sharpness.
All about sharpness.
Yeah.
This is on the free disc, the AVSHD disc we've been using. Not the ideal tool for setting sharpness. What is the ideal tool?
No, something like a nice gray pattern you'll find on a lot of the test discs out there that have what they call like a black crosshatch pattern, kind of a mid-level gray with a nice thin black lines, or usually different thicknesses of black lines, and you're basically looking at those lines. This pattern is usable, but it's definitely not ideal. And for adjusting sharpness, it really is one of the most misunderstood controls.
What does sharpness actually do?
You're basically adding information to the peak levels of the signal. You're basically also, if you turn it up too high, you're adding information that's not actually present in the video signal in terms of what you see. So really the overriding goal is to increase it as far as possible, but to the point where you don't introduce those unwanted artifacts. Basically, ringing, you'll see 2 main artifacts, something called ringing and something called basically, I think ringing is the majority of it. Although if there are other compression artifacts in a picture, if you're watching regular video with a lot of compression artifacts, increasing the sharpness too far will make those compression artifacts stand out even more. So what we're basically trying to do is, you don't want to turn it down too far because you don't want to soften the picture. You want all the detail you can get, but at the same point, take it too far and you're going to add stuff to the picture that shouldn't be there, and it can take problems in the picture, like I was saying, compression artifacts, and make them even more noticeable.
Sort of the inverse of digital noise reduction.
It can be, exactly.
So what are we looking at in the pattern here?
So this is the resolution test pattern off of the AVS disc, and what we're going to look at basically, this is kind of a light gray background to this with the black lines on there, and essentially with that pattern showing, we'll then go into the settings on the TV. Oops, picture controls.
Is it ever called anything other than sharpness?
I've never seen it called anything besides sharpness. So for that, and then with the control active, we're just going to crank it way up and down just to see what happens when you get out of spec. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn this way up.
It makes my eye hurts. It's a moire pattern. Make it stop.
For some of these valve-shaped test patterns on here, you can see along like the top edges and along the horizontal lines along the left side edges.
You're seeing like a bright white ghost of the end of the black line.
Exactly. You're adding essentially a white edge to a dark line
and it
to make the dark line stand out more. And those white edges and everything in there isn't actually part of the video signal. That's stuff you've added by cranking this control too high. So back it down until those tiny little extensions of the non-white edges disappear. I'm still seeing white dots across the top here and a little bit along there. So take it all the way down to the bottom, and you should sometimes see the picture just get fuzzy on you.
That's fuzzy.
Yeah, so now I'm going to turn it back up until we... Back.
There. Maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe down one more notch?
One more notch. So you are left with effectively what is the test pattern itself. Just the black lines on that gray background without that white ringing, without that additional data that shouldn't be there. Again, you don't want to take it too low because you will make the picture get less sharp, and you want that extra detail. And if you're sitting far enough back...
detail, but not too much false information.
Exactly. Because some purists would say, oh, you just crank that control to 0 and leave it there. That's not always the case. You're going to find that certain TVs will actually degrade picture quality by taking it too far. The center point's sometimes a good place to start and just go back and forth from there. Once it's set right, you shouldn't have to mess with it for different types of content. And the further back you sit, you might want to bump it up a little notch or two higher. Really? Than you might have otherwise if you're sitting closer, like right on top of the pattern, trying to get it just right. You don't want it too high, but I find it's better to go slightly higher than it is slightly lower. But if you're seeing a black line that should be a black line on a gray background, there shouldn't be any additional information around that, and you want to keep it clean. So.
Good to know.